Claude is better than ChatGPT at almost everything. Writing, coding, reasoning, editing, even document analysis. And yet, I still pay $20 a month for ChatGPT 2, which honestly makes no sense at first. Because if one AI is clearly smarter, shouldn't that be the obvious winner? After using both heavily, I realized the real competition is not about intelligence anymore. It is about workflow, reliability, ecosystem depth, and which tool actually fits into your daily life without slowing you down. And once you actually start using both every day, the Claude versus ChatGPT debate gets complicated very quickly. For starters, both tools cost exactly the same, $20 a month. And it's no secret that ChatGPT feels less like a single tool and more like an entire ecosystem. Almost like OpenAI is trying to build the everything app for AI. You open it, and suddenly you have GPT 5.3, GPT 5.4, thinking, DALL-E image generation, voice mode, Canvas, deep research, codecs, custom GPTs, memory, and all these extra tools connected within one platform. It feels huge, sometimes almost too huge, like every month, another feature gets added to the pile. But at the same time, that convenience is insanely useful. You can go from brainstorming an idea to generating images and researching something, coding a prototype, refining the final result without leaving the same app. And that matters more than people think. Claude feels completely different. Cleaner interface, less clutter, less noise. The entire experience feels calmer and more focused. You still get serious features like Claude Code, artifacts, projects, web search, research tools, Claude Design, and the massive 200,000 token context window. But Claude feels more like a thinking tool than an AI operating system. And at first, I liked Claude's approach way more. It felt less distracting, but eventually I realized something important. A cleaner experience does not automatically mean a better daily workflow. And that is where things started to shift for me. So I stopped asking, which AI is smarter? And started testing which one actually works better in real life. So naturally, I started with writing tests. Because this is usually where people notice the difference immediately. I gave both tools the same rough rejection email. Very simple task. Improve the writing without changing the original tone too much. And Claude honestly surprised me. The response felt weirdly human. Not human in the fake marketing way people usually use to describe AI. I mean, genuinely restrained. It preserved the structure of the original message instead of trying to completely reinvent it. The tone stayed consistent. The edits felt subtle and intentional, like a real editor polishing your draft instead of an AI trying to prove how smart it is. And that restraint became one of Claude's biggest strengths throughout testing, because a lot of AI tools have this tendency to overwrite. You ask for help polishing an email and suddenly it sounds like a corporate keynote speech. Claude rarely did that. It usually understood the emotional tone of the original draft surprisingly well, especially in professional writing. Emails, reports, client communication, and script editing all felt more natural and controlled with Claude. This was one of the areas where it consistently felt stronger. To the point where I can completely understand why the whole Claude versus ChatGPT for script writing debate has gotten so popular lately. Meanwhile, ChatGPT felt noticeably different right away. More energetic, more expressive, more eager. And sometimes that was actually useful. If I needed brainstorming help, multiple variations, or creative directions, ChatGPT usually gave me more to work with. But when it came to preserving tone, it often felt less controlled. Sometimes it added unnecessary polish. Sometimes it rewrote too aggressively. And weirdly enough, it occasionally made professional emails sound slightly artificial in a very LinkedIn influencer kind of way. Not terrible, just slightly overcooked. And I think OpenAI knows this too, because newer GPT models clearly seem to be tuned to reduce that overly dramatic style. But even then, Claude still felt more natural to me for serious writing. And honestly, that matters a lot when your work depends on communication. Because once you start using these tools for serious work instead of casual prompting, the small differences become really noticeable. I also wanted to properly compare Claude and ChatGPT with something more demanding than simple prompts. I uploaded the same 24-page PDF into both tools and started asking detailed questions about specific sections. Not summaries, not tell me the main idea. I mean actual reasoning questions that required understanding relationships across the document. And Claude consistently performed better. Not just slightly better, noticeably better. It retained context more naturally. It connected ideas across different sections more intelligently. And most importantly, it felt like it understood nuance better. There were moments where ChatGPT felt like it was searching through the document. Claude felt like it had actually read it. And that difference becomes extremely noticeable once you start working with large files regularly, such as research papers, long reports, business documents, legal files, scripts, transcripts. This is where Claude's 200,000 token context window genuinely matters. Not because the number itself is impressive, but because the conversations feel more stable over long sessions. Because the reasoning felt slower in a good way, more deliberate, more thoughtful, like it was actually considering relationships between ideas before answering. But once again, ChatGPT still felt incredibly capable, but slightly more optimized for speed and flow. Almost like a very advanced assistant trying to help you move quickly. Claude felt more like someone sitting down and actually thinking through the problem with you. And don't get me wrong, ChatGPT arguably has better web search integration and more reliable usage limits. But Claude often feels better for guided troubleshooting, software walkthroughs, and step-by-step problem solving, which we'll see in this next test. I gave both tools the exact same prompt. Walk me through setting up DKIM for Google Workspace on a domain hosted in Vercel. Step-by-step instructions only. No unnecessary questions. And surprisingly, both tools performed really well. Neither completely failed, neither hallucinated major steps. But the style difference became obvious again. ChatGPT explained everything. DNS propagation, expected delays, verification timing, potential mistakes, what to do if something breaks. It felt like a technical tutorial written for someone new to the process. Claude was much more streamlined. It focused almost entirely on execution. Here is what to click, here is what to paste, here is what happens next. Done. And depending on the situation, both approaches were useful. If I was tired and just wanted the answer quickly, Claude felt amazing. If I wanted deeper understanding and extra context, ChatGPT felt more comprehensive. So again, the answer depended entirely on workflow, not intelligence. But then we get to the part that completely changed my opinion on all of this. The rate limits. Because this is Claude's biggest weakness by far. Not quality, not reasoning, availability. And once you run into this during real work, it becomes impossible to ignore. There were multiple times where I was deep into a project and suddenly Claude slowed down, stopped responding properly, or hit usage limits in the middle of my workflow. And apparently, this is incredibly common. There are entire Reddit threads filled with Claude Pro users talking about hitting limits after just a handful of heavier prompts, especially during peak US work hours. Sometimes after only 30 or 40 minutes of serious use. This is where the entire Claude is smarter conversation starts changing, because intelligence stops mattering if the tool cannot stay available consistently. The smartest AI in the room becomes significantly less useful if it randomly disappears in the middle of your workflow. Meanwhile, ChatGPT just keeps going. And that reliability matters way more than people online like to admit. Because real work is messy. You are switching tabs, researching things, rewriting sections, testing ideas, going back and forth constantly. And in those moments, reliability becomes part of the product itself. Anthropic themselves even acknowledged reliability strain earlier this year as usage continued growing. And while both platforms are generally reliable overall, ChatGPT still maintains noticeably stronger uptime and consistency during heavy usage periods. Which honestly becomes a huge deal once these tools become part of your actual job. This is the moment where ChatGPT started making more sense to me. Not because it consistently gave better answers, but because it kept functioning predictably. And honestly, predictability becomes incredibly valuable once these tools become part of your daily workflow. Because the problem is not whether Claude can do the work, it is whether Claude lets you keep working. And I think this weakness may be one of the biggest reasons ChatGPT still dominates daily usage for so many people. Because eventually, convenience starts beating intelligence. Then there is the feature gap. Because let's be real here, ChatGPT simply does more. If I suddenly needed an image for a thumbnail idea, presentation, or mock-up during a project, ChatGPT could just generate it immediately inside the same workflow using DALL-E. Voice conversations, Canvas, deep research, custom GPTs, memory, codecs. Everything is connected together inside one platform. And after a while, you stop thinking about these as separate features. They just become part of how you work. That is what makes ChatGPT feel different. It is basically becoming the Swiss Army knife of AI. Maybe not always the absolute best at one specific thing, but capable of handling almost everything reasonably well inside one ecosystem. And honestly, that convenience becomes hard to ignore over time, especially during busy workdays when you do not want to keep jumping between different tools. Claude feels very different, more specialized, more focused, more refined, almost like a tool designed specifically for thinking. Meanwhile, ChatGPT feels more like an entire digital workspace. And interestingly, the platforms are even starting to feel different philosophically. ChatGPT keeps expanding into a much bigger feature-heavy ecosystem, even introducing ads on some lower tiers earlier this year. Meanwhile, Claude still feels cleaner, calmer, and far less cluttered overall. And there were multiple times where I personally preferred Claude's quieter experience. But there were also plenty of moments where I caught myself using ChatGPT simply because it was more convenient to stay inside one platform. That convenience adds up over time. At some point I realized most serious users are not actually choosing between Claude and ChatGPT anymore. They are building workflows around both. And the more I talked to people using these tools professionally, the more I kept hearing the same recommendation over and over again. Do not handcuff yourself to one model. I even saw people searching things like transfer ChatGPT to Claude after getting frustrated with certain workflows, which honestly says a lot about how split users are becoming. Because once you rely on these tools daily, their strengths become really predictable. ChatGPT becomes the daily driver. Quick brainstorming, research, multitasking, refining prompts, jumping between different projects, continuing work when Claude suddenly slows down or hits limits. Meanwhile, Claude becomes the specialist tool, the model you switch to when quality matters most. Final writing, deep analysis, reasoning-heavy work, coding tasks that require more careful thinking, long-form editing. And weirdly enough, this split workflow starts happening naturally. Not because people are trying to optimize everything like some AI productivity influencer, but because the platforms push you into different behaviors over time. And I genuinely think this is becoming the practical answer for professionals now, not replacing one tool with the other, using both strategically. Which also leads to something really interesting, because both of these tools can now build actual working apps directly inside the chat window. So naturally, I decided to test that next. First, I asked both Claude and ChatGPT to create a simple browser-based expense tracker. Add expenses, categories, dates, totals, clean design, a real working app, not just instructions. And surprisingly, both tools handled this really well. The apps were functional almost immediately. Claude's version looked cleaner visually, better spacing, better layout hierarchy, more polished overall. It honestly looked closer to something you would find on a modern startup dashboard. Meanwhile, ChatGPT's version felt slightly more structured underneath. ChatGPT often felt faster during generation, especially when using Canvas workflows. Claude sometimes took longer, but the visual polish usually came out stronger on the first pass. Then I pushed both tools even harder. I asked them to build a content calendar app for YouTube creators. Video titles, keywords, publishing status, sponsor tracking, filters, analytics counters, team workflow support. Far more moving parts, much more complexity. And this is usually where weaker AI tools completely fall apart. Logic starts breaking, layouts become messy, features stop connecting properly. But surprisingly, both tools performed far better than I expected. Neither completely collapsed under complexity. Both were able to generate functional apps with usable interfaces and surprisingly decent structure. That said, complexity exposed weaknesses fast. Claude sometimes produced cleaner-looking interfaces, but occasionally needed more prompt refinement when logic became complicated. ChatGPT felt slightly more stable structurally, especially when iterating repeatedly inside Canvas. But even then, the differences were not always obvious. Some outputs from Claude genuinely looked better. Some outputs from ChatGPT felt more usable. And after a while, it honestly stopped feeling like there was one clear winner. The more I tested both, the more this entire competition started feeling less like good versus bad, and more like two very different philosophies competing against each other. One prioritizing depth, polish, and reasoning. The other prioritizing flexibility, speed, and ecosystem integration. So if you're still asking, is Claude better than ChatGPT? After explaining all that, I honestly do not think the answer is as simple as people online make it sound. Because once you actually use both every single day, the differences become way more about workflow than raw intelligence. And that is really what this entire comparison came down to for me. I think the biggest mistake people make right now is trying to force a single universal winner out of this comparison, because there really is not one anymore. There is just a better tool for the type of work you personally do. If your work revolves around writing, analysis, editing, reasoning, long documents, or careful thinking, Claude genuinely feels stronger a lot of the time, especially if output quality matters more to you than speed. And if you prefer cleaner interfaces and more focused workflows, Claude feels incredibly good to use. But if you need versatility, reliability, image generation, voice features, stronger uptime, multitasking, and a broader ecosystem, ChatGPT starts making a lot more sense, especially once these tools become part of your daily workflow instead of occasional experiments. Because eventually, convenience, reliability, and ecosystem depth matter too. And I think that is the part a lot of benchmark-focused conversations completely miss. In real life, the best AI is not always the one that gives the smartest answer one time. It is the one that consistently helps you finish work with the least friction, day after day, without interruptions, without forcing you to constantly fight the tool itself. So if you are trying to decide between them, my biggest recommendation is honestly very simple. Try both free tiers first. You will probably figure out very quickly which workflow fits your brain better, because this is no longer just about intelligence. Even the bigger Claude versus ChatGPT versus Gemini conversation feels way less important once you figure out which workflow actually fits your life. It is about compatibility. So now I genuinely want to know your experience. Which one are you actually paying for right now? Claude, ChatGPT, or both?